Death is rarely the final chapter in these stories. Here, the end of a life is just the moment a haunting finds its voice. Vikram grew up in a place that looked like a postcard of rural peace, but that stillness was a mask. The villagers didn't keep quiet because they were content. They kept quiet because they were terrified. Everything was overseen by the zamindar, Raghavaya. He ruled with a zero-tolerance policy for dissent. In his eyes, a single act of disobedience was a capital offense, and he had the power to enforce it. It was a fragile stability built on a foundation of dread. Everyone knew that one crack in the zamindar's control would bring the whole house down on their heads. The crack appeared when his niece, Sahithi, returned from her studies in the city. She wasn't interested in his rules. She told him directly she had found someone she loved and intended to marry him, with or without her uncle's blessing. Raghavaya didn't argue. He simply issued a final warning. No one under his roof would live to defy his word. Within a week, Sahithi's spirit broke. The confident woman disappeared, replaced by someone who spent her nights whispering to shadows with a vacant stare. Word spread to the village square about her bloodshot eyes and the sudden, high-pitched laughter that leaked from her bedroom windows. The neighbors started whispering about black magic and ancient hexes. Months of isolation and her uncle's constant surveillance left Sahithi a shell of herself, creating a void that the locals believed something dark was starting to fill. The breaking point arrived on a night of heavy storms. A scream tore through the rain, coming from the heart of the zamindar's mansion. Vikram was among the crowd that gathered at the gates, pushed by a morbid curiosity they couldn't ignore. They found Sahithi on the floor. She was cold to the touch, but her face was locked in place, stretched into a smile so wide it looked like her jaw had been unhinged. The initial reaction was a strange sense of relief. The villagers believed that with the cursed girl gone, the screams would stop and life could return to the way it was before. They were wrong. Sahithi's death wasn't an ending. It was the catalyst that turned a family tragedy into a systematic nightmare. The air in the village turned heavy. Night after night, the sound of rhythmic sobbing drifted through the streets, and people reported seeing a slender, shadowy figure patrolling the outskirts of the zamindar's land. Then the knocking began. It wasn't the frantic banging of someone in need, but a slow, deliberate strike against the front doors of specific families at 2 a.m. Soon, the owners of those houses were being found dead in their beds, their faces twisted into the same impossible grin Sahithi had worn on the floor. These victims weren't chosen by chance. The first was the gatekeeper, who had locked Sahithi in her room. The second was the neighbor, who heard her cries for help and turned up his music. The spirit was working through a list of those who had stayed silent. Vikram's own family felt the reach of the curse. He spent a night paralyzed in his bed as he heard Sahithi's distinct manic giggle echoing from his sister's room, just inches away through the wall. This wasn't random violence. It was a targeted strike against every bystander who had prioritized their own safety over Sahithi's life. Desperate to survive, the remaining villagers hired a tantric. He was a man who had spent his life dealing with the restless dead, but even he looked unsettled when he crossed the village border. He warned them immediately that this wasn't a standard haunting. He was facing an entity fueled by a level of debt that blood alone might not satisfy. As he began the ritual, the wind died down to a dead calm. Then, in an instant, the ceremonial bonfire was snuffed out, plunging the entire square into absolute darkness. Sahithi appeared in the center of the square. Her spirit was contorted, her eyes leaking black tears. She didn't attack the tantric, she simply stared at him, her silence demanding a truth the village had buried. The tantric's protective circles were brushed aside like dust. He realized his prayers were useless here, because Sahithi wasn't looking for peace. She was looking for an admission of guilt. The spirit forced the truth into the tantric's mind. Sahithi had never been the victim of a curse while she was alive. She had been the victim of a very human crime. Raghavaya had been slipping a slow-acting poison into her food for weeks. He didn't want a niece who defied him. He wanted a warning to show the rest of the village what happens to those who forget their place. As the realization hit the crowd, the spirit turned toward the mansion. That night, Raghavaya's reign ended in a scream that lasted until dawn. The village eventually grew quiet again. Vikram moved away, the houses were sold, and for years it seemed as though the scales had finally been balanced. But if you visit that village today, you'll find that no one goes near the old mansion after dark. Every night at 2 a.m., that same high-pitched, mocking laughter still echoes through the empty halls. The tyrant is gone, but the debt he created remains unpaid, and the spirit of Sahithi is still waiting for the next person to look the other way. Subscribe now, and let us know in the comments, would you have stayed silent?